Welcome back. In the last video, I talked about the relationship between tax policy, economic conditions, and mental health. We'll talk a lot more about that because that's my primary academic focus and kind of the reason I started making these videos. But before we get too deep into the economics, I wanted to address a common misconception. For the past 40 years or so, most people, inside and outside of the mental health world, have been told that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. Upwards of 80% of people in the US believe this. Here's the problem. It's just not true. And when you think about it, it doesn't really even make sense. We learned in the last video that rates of depression have tripled in the past 25 years. Does that sound like a biological or a genetic issue to you? No, it doesn't. There are two main reasons this myth persists. One, pharmaceutical companies have spent billions trying to convince people that depression is caused by a chemical imbalance. If they can convince you of that, they can then sell you a pill to correct it. And that marketing works. Prozac, the most popular antidepressant, generates over $2 billion a year in revenue all by itself. Ironically, what doesn't work are antidepressants. Large meta-analyses show that they don't work any better than a placebo for 85% of the people who take them. On top of that, 70% of people who take antidepressants will experience side effects. Side effects such as blunted affect, sexual dysfunction, and ironically, even suicidal thoughts. For many people, the side effects outweigh any potential benefit. But that doesn't stop pharmaceutical companies from selling them. And that's the first reason the chemical imbalance persists. The second reason is what we call motivated reasoning. People are more likely to believe something if it's comforting to them, if it gives them a sense of control or relief. Most depressed people want to believe that their depression is chemical or genetic, because if it's not that, then it's something else. Maybe it's the way we're living, maybe it's the choices we make, or the environment we're stuck in. And let's be honest, no one wants to hear that, because if that's true, something has to change, and we're the ones who have to change it. So that's the second reason that myth persists. Now, two other myths worth mentioning while we're here. One is that serotonin drives depression. It doesn't. There's no evidence for that. Two is that depression is genetic, and it mostly isn't. Only about 10% of depression is attributable to genetics. Links to studies debunking both of these myths are in the description. So, if depression isn't caused by chemical imbalances and it's only 10% genetic, that leaves 90% due to the individual and the environment. And again, from the last video, rates of depression have tripled in the past 25 years. That means that one of two things has happened. Either the way the human brain functions has changed at a rate unheard of in the history of human evolution, or our environment has changed. Ask yourself which of those are more likely. In the last video, I argued that collapsing living standards are the reason depression rates are rising, and I broke down the financial situation for young adults so you could see how depressing the math really is. But how do we know it's young adults who are driving this trend? Well, here's a 2021 SAMHSA study showing mental illness rates by age group. Take a look at adults 50 and older. From 2008 to 2021, basically unchanged at 15%. Now look at people in their late 20s to 40s. The rate of mental illness is around 21% in 2008, up to 28% in 2021. Finally, the 18 to 25-year-olds, from about 18% in 2008 to 34% in 2021. In other words, depression among older adults hasn't changed, depression among younger adults has almost doubled. What this tells us is that whatever's driving mental illness rates upwards is hitting younger adults far harder than older adults. And that has everything to do with collapsing living standards. People 50 and older aren't being affected by the shifting economic landscape in the same way. Baby boomers have already bought homes, had children, saved for retirement, which is supplemented by Social Security, and they have Medicare. Many of them have pensions, stocks, bonds, 401ks. What reason do they have to be depressed? But young adults, they have none of that. They can't afford to buy homes, start families, or save for retirement. Their government is cutting healthcare programs and telling them that Social Security might be gone by the time they retire, but they're going to have to keep paying into it even until it disappears. They know that their lives will be harder than their parents. These are legitimate reasons to be depressed. It's not genetics, It's not a chemical imbalance, it's economics. Now that we've established that, we can start connecting the dots between tax policies, rising inequality, and the depression epidemic. But that's all the time we have for our session today. I'll see you next week.